Let's bring in Executive Director of Equal Education Law Centre, Tshegofatso Phala, who joins us for more. Very good evening to you, Tshegofatso. Thank you so much for your time. A lot of confusion and dissatisfaction from parents who are questioning the system and asking what is the point if you're going to put in so much effort only to be rejected and left with no school. What's your take?
I think what's been quite important is we've had the Western Cape government tell us that the online system has created efficiency for admissions, has made the process much easier. But what is quite clear to us as the Equal Education Law Centre is, whilst it may have done that for some, that the system is not inclusive, it's not equitable, and it's in fact harming the most vulnerable of communities, the most vulnerable children. You heard in the clip we just heard now, some children are being raised by ugogo, who doesn't have access to a smartphone, who doesn't have access to online systems. Some parents are simply getting rejected without assistance. And so whilst they may argue that the system has brought efficiency, it's clear that it's leaving hundreds, if not thousands of learners who are already vulnerable behind.
Yeah, and some of the questions that have been asked are who monitors and tracks this system that excludes children, mostly black children, from dire circumstances. What needs to happen to fix this? Because, you know, the ripple effect, as mentioned in that clip, is that it exacerbates the socio-economic issues and will in the end lead to dropouts.
I think the first thing that needs to be looked at is accessibility. There has to be a realization that a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to admissions, it's not going to work. We know that there's been some pop-up stations that are put in vulnerable areas like Kaili, Chalanga, where parents can go or grandparents can go and be assisted. But it's clear that more of these pop-up stations need to be done in order to make the system accessible. What's also clear is in the past, parents just knew a system, or grandparents, where they could simply walk across the road. If I live in Khayelitsha and go to the street across the road from me, this now is seeming not possible. And so it's clear there needs to be a system that allows parents to also still go to schools where this is more accessible for them. At the end of the day, what needs to be put in place is systems which are in the best interest of learners and protect their best interests. And it's clear that that is not what's happening currently. There also needs to be just more information given to parents, more, you know, we've said campaigns so parents understand what's going on. But it's very clear that currently the parents, it's a have versus a have nots. So if I've got access to information, if I've got access to the internet, I know what's going on. Yet if I sit in an area where I don't know what's going on and I don't have that access, I'm simply left out.
What do you think are some of the considerations that need to be made as we perhaps do a comparative analysis, if we have to compare what happens in Gauteng and the Western Cape? What are some of the factors that weigh heavily on the cries of parents in the Western Cape? Because they're saying that the situation, of course, prompts to substantive concerns around monitoring and accountability within the Western Cape Department's school placement system.
I think what we're seeing in the Western Cape is at the beginning of each school year, the next year, there's thousands of learners who are unplaced. And we're seeing a lot of these learners being in areas such as Khayelitsha, areas, Nomzamo, your areas which are particularly in a specific area which is predominantly black learners. What parents are being told in these areas is that the schools are oversubscribed. That's the message that they get when they apply. Oversubscribed means that those schools are full. And so what is clear is that the planning of the state and the rate at which schools are being built is simply not able to respond to the needs of learners and the needs for more school spaces. So it's clear to us that there's a need for better planning. There's a need for better resources. We've seen systems being placed recently, being told that a lot of schools are being built, that there's an infrastructure program. But what's clear to us is where the schools are being built is not necessarily where the need lies. It's also clear, as I said, there's a need for more pop-up systems. There's a need for better communication between schools and districts on how many learners are in their schools. In some schools in Khayelitsha, we have parents or principals saying to us, my school is sitting at over 60 learners in some classrooms. Yet when one looks at schools, which are your former Model C schools, or schools which are more well-resourced, in those schools they get to their 30, and then they say they are full. Whereas the schools of learners, which learners are underprivileged and less resourced schools, we're seeing them just simply being packed up to the seams in order to accommodate learners, which clearly shows there's the ill-prepared and insufficient planning.
Yeah, and racial inequality also comes in there. I know that 2 years ago, Equal Education Law Centre conducted a study revealing a range of issues that disproportionately impact black children from poorer urban communities. I mean, what stands out from that study, and which shows that not much has changed since then?
No, not much has changed. In fact, we as the Equal Education Law Centre at the beginning of this year had to, for the second time, take the Western Cape Education Department to court, because as late as the second term of school, we had learners in these areas sitting at home, unplaced, going from pillar to post, looking for schools, and they simply were not being given space. We also know that if our schools in these areas and under-resourced schools continue to be packed at the seams, continue to be sitting at a ratio of 40, 50 learners to a teacher, one can't be surprised when these learners are unable to concentrate, or these learners, their learning outcomes or the results which they output are struggling. And so we continue to be surprised, and where these learners sit in schools where their infrastructure continues to be inadequate, etc. And so our statistics will continue, and our results will continue to see these schools struggling and these learners struggling in their learning outcomes.
Yeah. Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Executive Director of Equal Education Law Centre, Tshegofatso Phala, speaking to some of the concerns around school placement in the Western Cape.